So after weeks of saying nothing's really happening out there, suddenly a lot of things seem to be happening. It all raises the question of whether we're on the verge of a realignment of the country's political landscape. Not too big a topic. Andrew, Alan, and Chantel were all here this week, so let's get them started. What say you, Mr. Coyne?
The answer is yes, twofold. One is, as everyone's been talking about, the decline and fall of the Bloc Québécois. They've lost a third of their vote in the last 10 days. The NDP taking up much of that space, now probably taking upwards of 12, maybe even 20 seats in Quebec by the time all this is done. And concomitant with that, the decline of the Liberal Party to numbers we've never seen, down in the low 20s. They're now the third party, brings into real question the future, certainly of the Liberal Party, possibly of the Bloc.
We should caution everybody that this is all based on polls, but the fact of the matter is, all the parties seem to not be arguing with the veracity of the polls. They're all suggesting that the surge, especially of the NDP, is something they are all seeing. Fundamental realignment, Alan?
Oh, I think at the very least it's going to be historical, and I think it has the potential, if some of these trends continue, to be actually transformative. I mean, the first thing is that the NDP, for the first time in their history, will be able to declare that they are truly a national party. Not only will they have a beachhead in the province of Quebec, but their total representation in terms of popular vote will be more representative and balanced than any of the other, both geographically and demographically, than either of the other parties. So they will have an authority in their voice that they've never had in Parliament before.
And you know, caution us again on numbers for the NDP. At what point do these numbers we see for the split of the vote actually mean seats?
Well, if their trend stops where they are right now, which looks to be about in the mid-20s, what will happen is that they will gain seats, but they will be only in handfuls, not in shovelfuls. And it probably will mean that the vote splits will allow the Conservatives to win a majority. But if they get up into the high 20s or low 30s, as some polls are now suggesting, and in Quebec up to the high 30s, you're going to see them win over 100 seats and deny the Conservatives a majority, and they will come back with a reduced minority.
I don't think I've ever seen sovereigntists squirm the way they are squirming this week, and the reason for that is not just that Gilles Duceppe sounds like he's coming back with a much reduced contingent and probably his leadership on the line, but also because this is happening when the PQ thought that it was coming back and going to march back up to a referendum. And you watch the two old players, the sovereigntists with the Bloc and the Liberals, falling by the wayside, and that kind of tells you that if we're going to have ever this debate again, it's going to be fought differently. It's not going to be a rematch. We may have a realigned Parliament. I would caution about the real realignment. All of this that is happening in Quebec to the NDP hinges on one thing, one person, Jack Layton. Take him out of the equation. And I'm not so sure that you have an NDP that is there to stay, even if they bring in 20, 30 seats. And for that, I remind you of Mario Dumont, a man who almost became premier and 2 years later was sent back. He hosts a television show. It's a nice career, but it is not a leader.
But he's not going to London tomorrow to do the royal wedding.
He is not. But the fundamentals that the Liberals and the NDP are splitting that opposition vote to the Conservatives, that hasn't changed.
You know, already some Federalist politicians of all stripes are saying, look, whatever happens here, it means the unity issue is settled. But they're not saying separatism is dead, as somebody else said 30 years ago. But I mean, how much of that equation is removed now, if this is what happens?
It is impossible to ignore the fact that the real bump in the NDP support in Quebec took place right after the PQ had a big meeting, a great mass of sovereignty, where Gilles Duceppe and Pauline Marois proclaimed that together they were going to lead the march back to a referendum. And in the couple of days that followed, and it's not the first time that Quebecers do this since the last referendum, every time someone has tried to hold them hostage to sovereignty versus federalism, they found a way out of the box.
That's right. It's not so much a rejection of separatism, it's a rejection of deciding.
And of being told you have to come, you're not going to have a choice, we're going to make you do this. Well, no. You know, Paul Martin tried after sponsorship in 2006 to say, I'm the Federalist option. That the Federalist said, oh yeah, this guy Harper sounds like a Federalist.
Nevertheless, when you see the Bloc at 27% in the vote, that suggests that if you asked, referendum-type questions nowadays, you would not be getting anything like the 40% that you've been, or even higher, that you've been seeing in the past. If
there is this kind of shift taking place, it's interesting. It'll be the second time in a generation that there's been a fundamental shift. I mean, the 93 vote that birthed the Bloc Québécois and the Reform Party changed everything fundamentally in Parliament. Is it that kind of nature?
It has that potential. I think one of the scenarios, again, if the NDP continue this surge that they have, is that the Liberal Party will start losing seats in metropolitan Canada. When that happens, they become transformed from from the national governing party that they've historically seen to be, to a party that not only has no distinguishing policy profile, but has no identifiable constituency left. This will make tremendous pressure for these two parties to merge, because they basically won't stand for anything any longer in terms of either who they represent or what they stand for.
Which has been going on for a long time, of course. I mean, they lost the West long ago. They lost Quebec 20, 30 years ago. They've been in the process of losing Ontario. They're now down to basically Toronto and Montreal, not much more. A few seats in Atlantic Canada, a few seats in BC. They're probably going to take, as usual, 6 seats in the West, which is where the population is going. So they have long-term, real deep-seated problems, coupled with they've been locked in this box for the last 2 years after the coalition fiasco of December 08, and they've been struggling throughout this campaign to get out of it, and they have not clearly succeeded.
If this is, an accurate representation of what's happening, were the merges, if there's such a word, those advocating a merger a year ago between the Liberals and the NDP, were they right?
Well, I was one of those. So I can't say that anything that is happening was not things that people, more serious people than me, people like Jean Chrétien and Roy Romano and Ed Broadbent predicted. That is, that progressive candidates would eat up progressive candidates. And when you watch the NDP, it is mostly happening at the expense of other progressive parties. For sure, today, if you put the proposition that they had recast themselves in one party and had gone to Quebec, for sure they would have swept Quebec. On the basis of what we've seen in this campaign, they would certainly have done better in Ontario than the NDP alone is going to do at this point.
I just remain a skeptic. You simply can't just add the votes together, the two parties. There are huge cultural differences, huge historical differences, policy differences. There will nevertheless, if the Liberals do as badly as they look like they're going to do, there will be a lot of pressure for a merger. But where does that leave the right wing of the Liberal Party? Where does it leave the John Manleys, the Frank McKennas? Frankly, they would be orphaned, and I think you'd see more realignment coming out of that.
You want to
well, just to add to that, that there would be pressure for a merger, I think, is undoubtable. That it would be difficult to make it happen, I think, is equally guaranteed. And for the reason that Andrew suggested, if the pressure will come because the NDP are on the up and the Liberals are on the down, then the NDP will have the whip hand in any kind of discussion.
That makes it harder.
Very much harder for the Martin Liberals to really hold their nose and be part of that, and may find them actually drifting over to the Conservative Party.
How significant is what's happening, what appears to be happening here, for the Conservatives? It's really interesting to see the kind of campaign they've run. It seems like almost every day they have some potential problem. And yet it doesn't catch on. It doesn't seem to have traction. Their numbers haven't fluctuated that much, although there appears to be a little bit of a dip going on now.
Pardon the pun.
Right.
A bit of a dip.
Yes, a bit of a dip. But what does it all mean for them?
Well, I mean, they're the Teflon party because they are the first party, certainly in my recent memory, who have no compunction whatsoever of alienating huge chunks of the population in order to motivate their base. And as a consequence, I mean, their base loves them. Stephen Harper's approval rating, his favorability rating among Conservative voters is 90%. That is unheard of. I've never seen that before. They vote that they're prepared to stick with them through thick and thin. But if their own supporters are the Teflon, their detractors view them as kryptonite, because not only have they, not gone below 40, they haven't gone above it. So their base creates a very high floor, but their detractors create a very low ceiling. So they trade in that very, very narrow area of popular vote.
Get the last word on that.
I agree with that. And the other thing is they had such a limited platform, it made it easier for them to have these slip-ups along the way. When you've got a policy a day, as they did in 2006, that takes the attention, that takes the focus, rather than campaign slip-ups.
All right. In case people were lost in the inside baseball of dips, I would pause there, trying to consider whether I should explain it. But I mean, many of us in the media, and not just in the media, and sort of politics, refer to the NDP as the dippers.
Affectionately.
Right.
Affectionately. The NDP, dippers. So they're the dips, and that was the pun. So you can all start laughing now.